Full disclosure, I haven't bothered to watch the original Kerala story because I was told that it's apparently a cheap propaganda film. And I'm gonna be honest, me as a Keralite, I went in to watch Kerala Story to Electric Boogaloo purely to hate on it and maybe make a funny roast video about the film considering its notoriety and meme potential. But having actually watched the film, I am pleasantly surprised for a lot of reasons. First things first, let me be abundantly clear in no uncertain terms that the Kerala Story 2 goes beyond any meaningful and acceptable levels of subtlety, nuance, or tact to prove itself time and again to be a propaganda film, and a very proud one at that. That being said, beyond the propaganda, politics, and the ideological drivel, there is an extremely compelling film, very much worth your time. In fact, the film plays out as an interweaving anthology featuring three equally gripping narratives centered around the topic of religious Islamic conversions, or love jihad as it's called. And I would be lying if I said I wasn't thoroughly invested in the stories, thanks in particular to the interesting, varied, and engrossing lead characters and their unique experiences. Propaganda but good. I'm getting crazy deja vu here as I type this because I think I said the almost exact same thing about Assi, released last week as well. And yes, Assi is shameless propaganda. Go watch my review. I have laid out my arguments and the data, facts, and logic supporting my argument. So there is that. I can already sense that at least some of you are probably pissed off by the fact that I compared Assi to Two Kerala 2 story, but the films are much more similar than you think. And I think that it's intellectually and morally disingenuous for the critics and cinephiles to treat Assi as some culturally relevant piece of art that needs to be witnessed and appreciated, and Kerala Story 2 The Two Towers as some kind of cheap propaganda that needs to be memed about. For starters, both the films are propaganda films centered around the plight of women in India, and they both tell dark and disturbing fictional stories allegedly based on real world incidents to push their core theme or subject matter or political agenda, whatever you want to call it. In the case of Assi, it's about the sexual violence tolerant climate in India, and in the case of the Kerala Story Part 2, it's about Islamic conversions. As a side note, it's kind of funny that we have both liberal and conservative propaganda films playing in theaters simultaneously, but hey, more choice, I guess. Now, I personally do believe that both these are very relevant and important subject matters. The propaganda aspect of these films, however, cannot be ignored, and it comes from the fact that both these films take their sweet time blowing it out of proportion when it comes to the scale of the incidents related to the actual subject matter. I have done the fact check for Assi in my review for it, but I don't think I need to do it for Kerala Story 2 The Reckoning, as the mainstream liberal media and the content creators and my own home state's very own impartial legal apparatus are more than willing to do it for me. Anyway, Assi's core message or theme, the fact that India is unsafe for women, is an accepted fact and is treated as a real concern and serious issue. But I find it really curious that the topic of love jihad and conversions are not treated with the same seriousness. I don't want to get into weeds of the subject, but claiming that love jihad never happens, or that there are no grooming gangs in the UK, or ignoring the very real threat of Islamic terror is something that has become an acceptable and fashionable viewpoint to hold among certain sections of the Indian educated populace. Why? Well, again, like in the case of Assi, preconceived political biases, virtue signaling, luxury beliefs, take your pick. Ultimately, the point is this: it is considered cultural sophistication to take this stance just to seem fashionable and holier than thou in this current dominant cultural landscape, lest you be seen as some kind of pleb. And so we have very less movies made on such a relevant and sensitive topic and any related subject matter, considering the critical and audience backlash. And so we have a series of films regurgitating the same tired mainstream liberal and feminist propaganda on a monthly basis, and then out of nowhere we have Kerala Story 2 The Rise of Burqa. You know what, if nothing else, this film is fresh, at least when it comes to the subject matter at the center of its politics. Love jihad might be a controversial topic, but the film explores it as a consequence of personal circumstances and lived experiences, not just some regurgitated political propaganda. It asks questions about secularism, free choice, and societal double standards without pausing the movie to give a lecture or something. And yes, we can argue about it in the comments if the subject matter, though blown out of proportion, is a real one, but regardless of your political biases, it is quite refreshing to see this matter represented properly on screen. However, it is quite unfortunate then to see that the film stoops so low when it comes to the execution of such subject matter on screen, to the point that it fails my two-tiered patented propaganda test. First question: does this film portray all good guys, heroes, or victims as belonging to one ideological group and the bad guys, villains, or the NPCs belonging to another. Yes, in fact, it goes even further. Every single Hindu character in this film is your sweet, innocent, naive family man or woman or daughter. Meanwhile, every single Muslim character in this film is cartoonishly evil beyond belief. I mean, it goes places. Second question, does this film beat you over the head with its political messaging? Oh yes, it does. In fact, the film has at one point have one of its villains shout out its core propaganda message out loud, to the point that we don't really even need to ask the question if this film is concerned about delivering a political message or not. Picture this, the evil Islamic conversion head office. The villain stands in front of a greened out map of India, almost looks into the camera and loudly declares, our duty is to convert Hindu girls into Islam. I'm not exaggerating here, and there is even an entire montage in the film dedicated to Muslims being beaten up while Har Har Mahadev plays as the background score. No, I'm not even remotely kidding. I mean, sure, Assi had its propaganda as well, but it's not this surface level or this tactless. In fact, like I mentioned in my review, Assi has well-rounded three-dimensional characters from all sides of the political spectrum. So, as a pure propaganda piece, Assi does a better job by not being too loud or too over the top, thereby diminishing the seriousness of his message. That being said, Assi commits the cardinal sin of using its narrative as a vehicle for delivering its political talking points instead of letting the story speak for itself. Let me put it this way. In Assi, you know nothing about the leads as actual human beings. The victim Parima exists purely to be a victim, and the lawyer Ravi exists purely to be the lawyer, both of whom have nothing else outside of this characterization, and the film expects us to give a shit purely based on their political talking points about the failure of the justice system and crime statistics and whatnot. Sure, Parima is shown to be a mother and a teacher, that is it. Film expects us to care for her because she's a victim and not because we give a shit about her on a personal level. I'm not trying to sound edgy or cruel here. In fact, it's more of a filmmaking issue, to the point that the person and the narrative I actually cared about more in the film was the umbrella killer and his B plot about the vigilante serial murders. My point is this, you can't emotionally manipulate an audience, especially via political talking points, to have them give a shit about the characters. This is not the case with Kerala Story 2 Reloaded. Sure, like I said, there are over-the-top propaganda moments that rear its ugly head every now and then, but the film for the most part is about these three very interesting characters who you may or may not like initially, but who you grow to care about as the film progresses, thanks to the strength of their character development and the tragedy that they are forced to go through. And now finally, the plot synopsis. This film tells the tale of Neha, Divya and Sureka, three young women who defy family and tradition for love, only to slip into the unseen cages of control and silence. What begins as a romance and rebellion mutates into manipulation and loss of freedom until the women strike back, turning captivity into a battlefield for survival. This is straight from IMDb. Back in my liberal college days, I used to think that the whole love jihad thing is not real, because are women really that stupid to fall for the silly trap of religious conversions in the name of love? But as time went on, I have realized that the answer is much more complex, and this film is weirdly pro-feminist, as in it shows how it's less about the women being stupid and gullible, but more about the unique personal experiences and choices that made this possible. For example, the character of Neha falls deeply in love with and then marries Raju and runs away with him against the wishes of her parents, only to realize that, well, Raju is in fact Faizan, and as she tries to leave, Faizan fakes depression and engages in self-harm to convince her to stay and convert so that she can be finally taken to his home with the blessings of his parents. Divya, meanwhile, no two ways about this. Divya is an online thirst trap making dancing reels to gain an online following, who is under constant fire from her conservative parents to stop this behavior, and her so-called lover Rashid offers to save her from them and run away together so that she can be a bigger content creator. Yeah, this goes as well as you can imagine. Last one is Neha, who has the most interesting background. She's a secular Malayali Hindu girl who, with the blessings of her liberal atheist parents, decide to live in with Salim, her liberal Muslim boyfriend. Yeah, what could go wrong? Obviously, none of these stories end well, with two of these having truly disturbing conclusions, but each of them are captivating and gripping in their own way, propaganda or not. And even outside of the whole propaganda aspect, the film asks some very valid questions that I think need to be answered, or at least needs to be pondered over by the Hindu and liberal community at large, such as, is secularism supposed to be a one-way street? If love jihad doesn't exist and all we have are love marriages, then why are there conversions? And if there are conversions happening purely for the sake of love, why only Hindu to Muslim conversions and not the other way around? Similarly, if eating beef is somehow a sign of secularism or part of Kerala culture, why is that eating pork is not considered in the same light? There is a lot more to be pondered over, and what we might ultimately end up with will be the prisoner's dilemma thought experiment with the Hindus and Muslims being the subjects, but that's too much philosophizing for this channel, so let's move on. All that being said, obviously some of this is controversy for the sake of controversy, no two ways about it. There is a viral forced beef scene where the Hindu girl is forced to eat beef, which is a bit weird now having watched the film, because she is supposed to be this proud, secular, liberal, progressive Hindu girl. Trust me, there is not a single secular, liberal girl in Kerala who would be opposed to the concept of eating beef. And while we are on the topic of eating beef, you would think North India would be more concerned about the fact that their own states, chiefly Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, are slaughtering and exporting cattle in record numbers before they try to condemn South India and especially Kerala for being an affront to Hinduism. So until you guys sort that out, let's keep your hypocrisy in check, shall we? And there is the fact that the film is called Kerala Story 2 Back in Business while having absolutely nothing to do with Kerala. So while I do respect the free speech aspect of the film's right to exist, I can see how it can be misleading and defamatory against my state. All that being said, yes, I do believe in the film's right to exist. You cannot oppose a film being released purely based on the grounds that it is not agreeing with your ideological biases or offending your delicate sensibilities. And this goes for both Assi and Kerala Story 2 Reloaded. And if depicting stories based on real life events are an affront to communal harmony, perhaps we should reevaluate the concept of what constitutes communal harmony in the first place. In fact, considering the very few number of films that talk about this subject matter, I think this film is more than necessary and it should exist. Whether you watch it or not is purely up to you. Lastly, a note on the technical and filmmaking side of things. There is not much to write home about, but the fact that the film treats these stories as separate and parallel means that even if you don't find one story to be interesting or engrossing, the film would shift perspective to the other one every few minutes without being jarring or out of place, which helps a lot with the film's pacing. And while we're on the topic of filmmaking choices, outside of the sharp editing which contributes to a really well-paced film, making sure that the film never gets too boring, there is nothing very interesting to talk about. Sure, there are some interesting vistas here and there, but most of the film is shot like a very typical mid-budget Bollywood film. What I do appreciate though is the makeup and costume design, which slowly shows the physical deterioration of the leads as the movie progresses. Okay, I guess that is it. So to bring it all together, is this a propaganda film? Yes. Is the film good despite the propaganda? Also yes. Just like Assi, I would say if you agree with the film's messaging, go watch the film. You will have a grand time. Unlike something like Assi though, I would still recommend everyone to watch the film regardless of your political affiliations, as you don't get films about this particular topic for obvious reasons. Look, it's not some masterpiece of filmmaking, neither is it absolute trash. It sits somewhere squarely in the middle and has something unique to contribute to in the world of cinema, even as a propaganda film. So it's worth watching, at least when it comes out on OTT. So until next time, this is the Indian Movie Critic. Bye.